So good morning. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I see bows. That tells me that people can hear me. That's a good sign. So I'm going to start out with a koan this morning. Maybe I'm going to make a comment about koans. Many of you are working on koans now. You know, when I approach a koan now, sometimes I remember the answer that I gave when I passed that koan 100 years ago, whenever it was. And sometimes I have no recollection whatsoever of what it was that, and I look at that koan and I say, how did I ever pass that koan? I have no idea what it's about. So if you ever have that experience of not knowing what the koan is about, me too. Now, that said, you know, then there's, when I reapproach the koan, you know, sometimes the meaning does pop out to me, and sometimes it takes a little more. But often, as is the case with this koan, this sort of popped out very clear to me, and I have no idea if it's the understanding and reply that I gave to it years ago. I have no recollection of what I might have said about this then. But it spoke to me now in a certain way. And so this goes to those of you that are doing koans. That's really, I think I've mentioned that unlike some schools of Zen where they believe there is a single right answer to each koan, we don't. There are many possible right answers. And so how do we evaluate a right answer from a wrong answer? Well, I use 3 criteria. First criteria, is your response consistent with the Dharma? Right? Is it the Dharma? Second thing, is it the Dharma as expressed in that particular koan? Right? It's always, you know, the koans bring forth different aspects of the Dharma. And there's something you would always say, oh, it's about the relative and the absolute. Well, of course, every single koan is about the relative and the absolute in some way. So that's not a meaningful response. So what's the specific thing that koan is looking for? And the third thing is, does it move you or affect you in some way? You know, was the experience of intimacy with that koan in some measure transformative? And if the answer to those 3 questions is yes, then you pass the koan, even if it's an answer that I never would have thought of in a million years. It's actually one of the nice things I feel about teaching is that I'm often surprised. Students come up with wonderful answers that would not have been my answer or were not my answer. So it's really a very, in many ways, it's a very vital process. It's a very alive and metamorphosizing process. Okay. So that said, is that a real word? Did I make that word up? Metamorphosing. I don't know. Anyway. So this koan involves 2 characters, Kuei Shan and Iron Grindstone Liu. Okay. Kuei Shan, in this case, he was Iron Grindstone's teacher. But she now is an adept in her own right. And she actually, at this point in time, lives in her own hut, somewhere in proximity to Kuei Shan. And so this encounter involves her popping over to visit. And so the reason she's called Iron Grindstone is because she is so formidable in Dharma combat that she pulverizes the bones of any monks that attempt to best her. So She is one tough, formidable lady. But here she is coming to see her old teacher, Kuei Shan. Iron Grindstone Liu arrived at Kuei Shan. Kuei Shan said, "Old cow, so you've come." The grindstone said, "Tomorrow there's a great communal feast on Taishan. Are you going to go, teacher?" Kuei Shan relaxed his body and lay down. The grindstone immediately left. I'll repeat that. So Iron Grindstone Liu arrived at Kuei Shan. Kuei Shan said, "Old cow, so you've come." The grindstone said, "Tomorrow there's a great communal feast on Taishan. Are you going to go, teacher?" Kuei Shan relaxed his body and lay down. The grindstone immediately left. So this is certainly one of the more enigmatic encounters in Zen koans. And we're going to come back. I'm actually going to leave it for a bit and come back to it. The reason I brought this koan up today is because there was some discussion on the little wild fox emails list this week about hope. Okay. And I think hope is something that's very much on everybody's minds these days, right? I mean, you know, these are such disturbing times. There's such sort of dark things going on. There's so many fearful things going on, and people are looking for hope. Well, if you've come to Zen looking for hope, you've come to the wrong place. Right? Hope is not a Buddhist concept. And we'll get to why that is. But if you go through all of the literature, all the teachings of the Buddha, he never talks about hope. I can't speak to contemporary teachers, but certainly classically in Zen, if you go through all the koans, all the, you know, there's not going to be a one that's about hope. So why is that? We're at this point we're in a difficult time. Many of us are struggling at various levels. And at those times are the times we need our spiritual practice. We show up, we say, you know, I want something. I'm going to go on Sunday morning and I'm going to get something that's going to help me get through the next day or the next week or whatever. You know, some inspiration, some hope. And yet in Zen, we say no. Because what is hope? Hope is attachment to a future outcome, right? Usually a particular outcome or a particular set of outcomes. But the important part is it's attachment. It's wanting something that isn't at this moment. It's creating an expectation, may or may not be fulfilled. One of the things we know that we cannot do readily is predict anything outside of this very moment. We have an illusion of assurance. We have an illusion that the ground we're standing on is solid. We have an illusion that says, oh, yes, I'm going to be alive tomorrow. I'm going to be able to do my work tomorrow. I'm going to be able to go here, there, and do all these things. But those are, in fact, illusions. Where I saw that very clearly in my life was the morning that I woke. I think it was actually a Monday morning. And I would be waking up with all my normal expectations about the week and getting ready for the week. And I was having a heart attack. And suddenly that all went out the window. The illusion was complete that I was going to have a normal week was completely dashed. Even the illusion that I was going to continue to live was dashed. It was in question. Those were all assumptions that I made that didn't necessarily have any basis in reality. And we do that constantly, right? It's kind of part of our human nature. We plan a vacation 6 months ahead. In today's world, what's the actual probability that we're going to have that vacation 6 months later the way that we planned it? Who knows? But the problem from the Buddhist perspective, from the Zen perspective, is not having a plan for a vacation. Many vacations would be impossible without the plan, without making the reservations, without doing the preparation, without saving the money, without the various elements that go into our being able to go there. From a Zen perspective, the problem is attaching to that. And any of the myriads of things that might disrupt that plan come up, and then we're upset and we're disappointed and we're angry and we're frustrated, which all arises out of our attachment. Hope is attachment. And when we talk about suffering in the sense of which the Buddha meant the word, hope is a source of suffering. I mean, if we're lucky enough and the thing we're hoping for comes true, then, we're happy, it's good. But so often in life, there's, so much of our lives, all of our lives are lived in these complex, chaotic systems that the greatest supercomputers can't predict outcomes. And we somehow assume that we can see the outcomes. We can't. Now, does that mean that Zen is negative? Does that mean that Zen is nihilistic? Does that mean that Zen is hopeless? And the answer to that is no. What Zen is telling us repeatedly is simply do not attach. Live life where you are right now. Invest yourself in this moment. Now, that's not always pleasant. It's not always reassuring. It doesn't always make us happy. But what Zen says is that we need to live our lives. What does Nan Chuan say? The great way is not difficult, only avoid picking and choosing. Right? It says we live our lives with whatever is there. We embrace whatever is there. We live fully in the face of whatever is there. And when it's good things and it's good news, we're going to be happy, and we're going to, and when it's sad things and sad news, we're going to be sad. And that's okay, because if we're doing all those things in a way that we're not attaching, then the various states come and go. But they don't necessarily knock us over. They don't derail us. They don't throw us such a curve that we can't recover. In effect, Zen is giving us a boat with which we can ride upon the waves of life. Sometimes we're going up, sometimes we're going down. Sometimes we're tipping this way, sometimes we're tipping that way, right? But that's what the boat does. But it always, hopefully, especially for Melissa, we hope it stays on top of the water. Right? But so Zen is, in a sense, the Buddha's teaching, it's a vessel. It's a vessel for us to ride the waters of life. It's not an assurance that those waters are going to be calm, nor is it a negative view that says, oh, those waters are always going to be terrible and stormy. But it's a vessel that's there no matter what happens. Allows us to stay above water no matter what happens. So now I'm going to come back to Kuei Shan and the iron grindstone. So one of the things that you don't know, but that if you had read the commentary on this koan, that Taishan, where this festival, this communal feast is taking place, is 600 kilometers or 600 miles away from where they are. So clearly, there's no way that anybody could get to that festival, that feast in Taishan tomorrow. So why is the grindstone coming and asking, are you going to the festival? She knows darn well there's no way he can go to the festival. What I suspect she's doing there is she's cluing him in. I'm not here to talk about geography and festivals. This is a Dharma question. I'm asking you about the Dharma. How do you respond? And he responds by relaxing and laying back down. There's one commentary on this koan that I read where they say that he died at that moment. I only saw that one place. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's really in a way not material. Why is he doing that? Why is he laying back down? To me, what he is saying is, I'm living my life right here, right now. This is where the Dharma is unfolding, right here, right now. And it's time to rest, so I'm going to rest. That's the only thing that we can count on, is what's right here, right now. It's the only place that we can live, is right here, right now. whatever fanciful journeys we may take in our minds, they are just that. Whatever plans we may make are just that. So again, is this saying we should never make plans? We should never take trips? We should never have hope? No, but I think it tells us how we have to hold those things if we want to avoid suffering. We have to hold them lightly without attaching to the outcome. And that's often very hard. Look at this, one that's very problematic at this moment that we're probably all feeling is this situation in Ukraine. I certainly have an outcome that I am attached to there. I want to see the Ukrainian people prevail. I want to see Putin get kicked out. What's the probability of that? Nobody knows. I mean, pundits will tell you they know. You can read all sorts of articles. I read one this morning. I think it was from the Atlantic, where basically this author was arguing that this is it. Putin has made the huge mistake he's done. The end of this is going to be the fall of his regime in Russia and greater democracy in the world. And I thought, well, that's an outcome that I would like to see. But where I have to be careful is going sort of beyond that to attaching to that outcome. And in this case, it's clear, right? We can all probably agree, well, that's that one pundit's opinion, and there's lots of other opinions. You can pick up the New York Times, and they'll tell you that there's no chance Ukraine can prevail. And then you can pick up another Washington Post, and they're going to tell you it's 50-50. We don't know the outcome. There's as many opinions as there are writers, and we don't know. We don't know. So we need to have some sense of what we might like, but we have to hold that very, very lightly. Now, is that the same thing as being wishy-washy? Is that the same thing as being non-committal? I mean, you might turn that around on me. We say, well, Peter, if the Ukrainian people did what you're saying, they just let Putin go marching through the country and nothing would happen. They have to resist. Yes. That's their here and now. That's the reality that they're living in directly. It directly affects them today or tomorrow, whether they pick up a gun, whether they hide in a bomb shelter, whether they go out and tell Russians to go fuck themselves, right? That's the direct experience of their lives. It's not theoretical. It's not, are you going to the fair in Kuei Shan tomorrow? So that's the distinction. There's a distinction when we are sort of the voyeurs watching from afar, and when we are the people that are living directly in it. What's our direct experience today? Thank God it's not a war on our in our lives, on our territory. And yet it also is. Right? We also know this world is very small. We know that what's happening in Ukraine can very much affect what's happening here. And we know as Buddhist practitioners, we are affected when people are being killed, whether they are Ukrainians or Russian soldiers or, nearby Poles or whoever. That affects us. We're not immune from that either. It's all part of what's happening in the one body. So again, the key is being light on our feet, of not attaching, not holding on, not clinging, but responding in each moment. When we see suffering, responding with compassion. When we see a need, responding with the need, to the need. When it says people in Ukraine need food, we send food. Responding immediately in the moment. Now, this raises another really interesting question. The question of things like mantras and prayers. When we pray or when we say a mantra, a Tara mantra, or Om Mani Padme Hum, are we trying to determine something, the outcome of something? If we're praying for the people of Ukraine, we're praying for peace. And the answer is yes and maybe. It depends how we're doing it, how we're holding it. Are we clinging to it? Are we, or are we engaging in a way that isn't attached to the outcome? Very fine distinction there. You could call me on that and you would be right. It's a very fine distinction, but it's there, or at least how much, to degree. Is there degrees of attachment? Of course there are. Right. And so we're gonna, broaden it out. Are we attached to peace? Are we attached to love? Are we attached to fundamental human dignity? Are we attached to human rights? The answer, again, is complex and subtle. We want those things. We should want those things. We should work to make those things happen. But that makes them part of our omnipresent daily reality. It's not, we're not hoping. If I'm going to sit here and hope for world peace, that's very different from going out, going to someplace, going to Africa, going to the Ukraine and helping people. Hope doesn't do much. Action does. In a sense, hope deludes us, perhaps, to feel that we don't need to take action. If we all sit around hoping that the people in Ukraine have enough food, but nobody puts the food in a truck and drives across the border from Poland, they don't eat, right? So there darn well better be some people that are not hoping, but that are acting. There better be some people that are turning that situation into the actions of their everyday reality, to their reality, and acting. So now, just to make this a little more complicated, because it's already actually fairly complicated, we are now in the age of the voyeur, right? We can see everything that's going on this planet virtually from our living rooms. That's the reason I no longer put on the BBC News, because it's like every tragedy in every village anywhere on the globe they talk about. Is that bad? I don't know, but it's too much for me. It's more than I can digest, and it's nothing that I can do anything about directly. Sometimes I can. So I think on one level, it's good to have awareness, because we don't know whether we can help, whether we can interact unless we're aware. We don't want to shut down. But we don't want to overload ourselves with situations where we cannot do anything. Again, it's subtle. Now, the classical Buddhist approach would say, and classic Zen approach, that because this is one body, because everything affects everything else. For example, when we bring peace in our lives, we are helping to bring peace into the whole world. And that's true. But that can turn around. That can also become a cop-out. I don't have to do anything other than what I'm doing. I don't have to send food to the Ukraine, because in the one body, if I have enough food, they have enough food too. No, that would be an absolutely absurd argument to make, right? So we've got these complex dialectics, these complex balances that we need to reckon with. When do we act? How do we act? When do we watch? When do we stop watching? When do we travel to the feast, and when do we relax our bodies and lie down? But from a Zen perspective, hope has no place in it. And again, that's not being negative. That's not being unhopeful. It's simply saying that hope does not transform. Hope is not action, and it's not transformation. It may make us feel a little better for a short while, But since that hope is based on a delusion, there's a good chance that eventually it's going to make us feel worse. So when we feel bad, when we're upset about something, the solution is to take action. What can we do right here, right now in our lives to make a difference? Okay, thank you.
Peter, your words made me think a lot about the just reflecting in the past 2 years, now that we're at the 2-year mark of the pandemic, and sort of the continuing practice that I think many of us had with much of what you're talking about. For those of us who plan a lot, we all got good practice at having hopes dashed, plans scuttled. And because of the nature of the pandemic and the uncertainty of it, we kept making plans and the plans kept getting dashed. And, you know, I do think that after some time, it was such a stark lesson, right? I mean, we all have these experiences of things, you know, of uncertainty and things not going as planned, but it happened so much on such a huge scale. You know, graduations got canceled, weddings got canceled, you know, vacations, you know, I mean, all of those types of things. You know, school was online, right? Over and over again. That, you know, so many of us in our vocabulary began saying, if it's possible, if it will happen that way, perhaps we can do this, perhaps we can do that. It was like, I think in this sort of unconsciousness, we got so well trained in uncertainty and sitting and not knowing. It's been a practice of not knowing. And, you know, we didn't not take action. We all tried to live our lives as best we could. But we were immersed in this practice of not knowing the whole time, that we continued to try to just move forward with our lives as best we could. And just the last point, when you were talking about mantras, I developed a mantra probably about 6 months into the pandemic, you know, as someone who's in a position of constantly needing to organize things and plan things and oversee things, only to see sometimes the absurdity of those plans that we were making. And so I finally just, you know, to try to have some kindness and understanding for myself, my mantra was, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. So, you know, as things unfolded and I would look back on, why did I think we could do this? Or why did I think we could do that? I would just say to myself, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, and just try to let go of the fact that there was a plan. We thought it was going to work one way, and it very much didn't. So anyway, those were just some things that came to mind as you were talking. And thank you very much. It's a wonderful talk this morning.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you're right on point. I mean, the whole pandemic, that is a great example of our trying to grasp on, trying to cling, and repeatedly getting told no, you know, and you're right. When your little mantra, it's about holding it lightly, right? It's just, all right, holding it lightly. You know, we have to make plans, you know, but we have to understand that there are infinite contingencies that we can't comprehend. And so when those plans aren't fulfilled, Impermanence, we cannot change impermanence. Impermanence is acting all the time. It's acting on us. It's acting on everything around us. Right? We like to forget that. That's when we like to forget for a whole host of reasons. And therefore, anything that we think is solid and permanent and, and reliable isn't. It might be for a short period of time, but ultimately, right, everything isn't. Everything is going away. Is that negative? No. It's just acknowledging the truth, the reality of our lives, of our world. I love it. I don't know if some of you saw this, but I just saw this morning a little like a blurb on Facebook for coffins made out of mushrooms. Seen that? And they decompose, they help the body decompose rapidly. Within 3 years, gone, soil. I thought, wow, that's so great. That's such an acknowledgement of impermanence. It's the exact opposite of making a granite sarcophagus of some kind. And, it's helping the body return to what it was. It's great. But anyway, we constantly, in so many ways, we resist. And that's what this Zen is saying. Let go. Hold it lightly. Don't know, right? You brought that phrase up, which is completely appropriate phrase. We think we know, but we never know. So we have to hold lightly. I mean, we have to make an assumption. I have to make an assumption that the floor is solid or I can't take a step, right? Who knows? Maybe the floor is rotten. Maybe the termites have been working their way there, and the next time I take a step, I'm going through. But so we have to make some assumptions. We have to take some steps, but we have to do it lightly. Is it okay for me to segue a little bit now? People are silent. I don't know if you're digesting or it's okay to segue. No, okay. So I think I've mentioned recently, I tend to see Brad Warner's little talks on Facebooks. He's doing the little talks he's doing like, they're like 10, 12 minutes. They're very short. And he's not verbose like I am. And he tends to try to find sort of a little bit unusual, a little bit offbeat topics. But one that I came across this morning that really resonated with me. And I only listened to the first minute or two. I didn't have time to hear the talk, but is the issue of cultural appropriation in Buddhism. We're looking at cultural appropriation in so many places, but we haven't tended to look at that in terms of Buddhism. And I thought, well, what an interesting question to explore. And where does it begin and where does it end? And what is it okay for us to do? And what is it, in the same sense, like if I went to hear a Native American teacher speak, indigenous person, and he or she was talking about the importance of taking care of the earth, of honoring and respecting the plants, of, you know, having a peaceful heart towards all beings. And I did those things. I don't think that would be cultural appropriation. But if I put on a headdress and painted my face and got rattles and bells or something, oh, now all of a sudden I'd be in a very different area. So you know, I'm thinking, okay, when I put on my robes are Japanese. They literally come from Japan. They're made of Japanese silk. They're a Japanese style. I mean, I could go beyond, but that's just one example. Is that okay? I mean, I've never given that any thought. We do a Buddhist service. We're not doing them now online, but in a few weeks there'll be a retreat. There'll be services. You know, some of the elements of those services are kind of universal, but some are more culturally specific. You know, is that okay? And I don't have an answer to any of that, but I wonder if that's a question that would be interesting for us to explore in the next couple of weeks. Hmm. I don't know how to understand the silence. Are you all, is it noble silence? Or are you taking the Buddha's way out? Are you gonna?
So it just seems,
I guess that idea of cultural appropriation is something I haven't really thought much about. But I do feel like America is a big exporter of cultural appropriation by our movies and media and other people adopting our, some of our our ways of being, our ways of doing things and seeing things just through that like dominant media that we export. So I guess the question is that good or bad, or it just is? It's not really good, bad, or I don't know where that puts us in the world, but it puts us in a different place than many things, I think.
Well, it's a good question, and I'm not going to answer it, but today or not, you know, there's a whole part of the world that's very upset that we do that. That you know, that's one of our fundamental problems in the Middle East, is that they're feeling that their cultures are being overwhelmed by our cultural exports.
Yeah.
in a way, the divisiveness that we're currently experiencing is fed by culture wars. So one group of our citizens um, believes that you don't name a team the Redskins, and another group says, yes, you do. Um, so I don't know if that's cultural appropriation but it's certain the cultural differences that exist right now um, seem to be the food that is being used to divide the country. So it would seem to be an important topic in that matter.
I'm thinking that with respect to the robes and stuff that we take from Japan, we are taking the practice of Zen from Japan, the whole ideas of Zen from, and we don't have our own forms here to sort of contain it yet, to express it from ourselves directly yet, that expresses it in a really sort of powerful way. So, and so I'm thinking that we sort of need to use those Japanese forms, at least at this early stage of Western Zen, just because we don't yet have our own, and there has to be some kind of vessel that we use.
Well, we're sort of getting into this a little bit, just fine. We can scratch the surface there, but I guess the question I would ask is, then by the same token, is it okay? I as a white person of European descent have lost my indigenous relationship to the world. I had ancestors who were, but they're so many generations back that that's been lost. Is it therefore okay for me to behave like an indigenous American until I get my own set of things?
Well, this is Molly. I would think part of this gets into the intent. They always say, right, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So sometimes maybe you see the Buddhists in Japan and part of their rituals you're attracted to, or the indigenous people, and you say, hey, I want to be that. I want to share that. So I don't think that wanting, that yearning, that sort of the need to internalize it or try it on is an erroneous thing. But maybe the co-opting of it and taking it, calling it your own and coloring it a different color and presenting it as an original thought, that might be where you get into trouble.
Good. We won't answer this today. Good. I mean, there are indigenous Americans who will say, yeah, what somebody said, something about imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So, we'll say, yeah, imitate us. That's great, because you're not being so destructive and terrible when you're imitating us. And there's others who will say, do not imitate us at all. This is what our ancestors taught us. This is our practice, our lives. And you're coming in here, you're colonizers. You've destroyed everything with your colonizing and your attitudes. And we don't want you anywhere near anything that's ours. And then there's kind of all sorts of gradations in between. and usually, well, not usually, but I think theoretically, it's usually the people whose culture it is who get to make the decision, as to whether they're comfortable sharing it. Would there be kind of difficulty? We're not going to go to Japan. Who would we even ask in Japan? Or as to whether. I don't know. I think we should at least raise a few beads of sweat over this question.
I had an experience in Japan. We lived there for 5 years, and in the early year of living there, I tried very hard to fit in the sense of not standing out. The Japanese on the whole are quiet, even in crowds are quiet. At that time, conservatively dressed, thoughtful and polite to each other. And I remember walking down the street in Tokyo one day, and coming toward me was a young Western woman with naturally red hair, wearing a bright blue raincoat. And if she had had a red bulb on her nose and big floppy feet, she could not have stood out anymore. And I realized that I, with my blonde hair and hazel eyes, was as bizarre to Japanese eyes as she was coming down the street to me. And at that point, I stopped trying to look Japanese, which of course I couldn't do. But it was a revelation to me as to how very, very different I was, no matter what I put on or what I did. So there's only so much a cultural accommodation or acculturation that one can do. One is still oneself. I just offer that as an experience that was revelatory to me at the time.
Good. I think we're gonna. I think we've got good seeds of a discussion for next week. We're not going to get this one done today, but something for you all to consider and think about. And partly, again, this is in this. I think this is in, at least for me, it's partly out of some of the reading things that I've been doing, is partly contextualizing the fact that we are the 800-pound gorillas. We have gone all over this world, trampling on other cultures. We have gone, all over this world, enslaving people. We have gone all over this world, doing, and do we therefore need to have a different sensitivity because we've hurt many people. We as a culture, we as a civilization in the rest of the world, and we've destroyed many things in the rest of the world. And does that mean we give us a responsibility to tread lighter and be more careful and be more respectful? Good. We won't answer it today.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a good week. And stay safe and well.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you. Take care.
Thank you.